They saw a grieving widow, all alone in a house that was too big for her. When my son got married, I let them believe it. I never said a word about the 2,000-acre farm my late husband secretly left me. Thank God I kept my mouth shut. Because just 5 days later, my son and his shiny new bride took me to a fancy steak dinner. With a notary. They had a whole new life planned for me. But their proud smiles faded the moment I revealed I had a plan of my own. This is the story of my revenge. Follow along so you don't miss what happens next. Like this video and let me know in the comments what you would have done. The silence in the house was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. It had only been a week since Richard's funeral, but the quiet had already seeped into the floorboards and clung to the curtains. It was a physical presence, a constant reminder of the 40 years of noise that had suddenly vanished. The echo of his booming laugh, the sound of the TV permanently fixed on the news channel, the heavy tread of his work boots on the hardwood. All gone. Now, there was only the hum of the refrigerator and the frantic beating of my own heart. That afternoon, Mr. Thompson, Richard's lawyer, sat across from me at the dining room table that was still too big for one. He was a kind man with tired eyes who smelled faintly of peppermints and dusty paper. He walked me through the will. His voice a gentle drone. The house was mine, free and clear. The savings account, modest but stable, was also mine. It was all predictable, exactly the responsible, no-fuss legacy I expected from my husband. I nodded, signed where he indicated, and prepared for the meeting to end. "Now, Sarah," he said, pausing as he slid the official papers back into his briefcase. He then reached in again and pulled out a single, thick manila envelope sealed with wax. "There is one other matter. Richard was very specific. This was to be opened only by you, and only after he was gone." My brow furrowed. Richard wasn't a man for secrets or theatrics. He was a creature of habit, of simple truths and hard work. I took the envelope. Felt heavy, important. I broke the seal with my thumbnail and pulled out a sheaf of papers. The top page was a letter in Richard's familiar, blocky handwriting. "My dearest Sarah," it began. "If you're reading this, I'm gone, and I'm sorry I had to leave you. I'm even sorrier for this last secret. I know you value honesty above all else, but I hope you'll see why I had to keep this quiet." My eyes scanned the page, my pulse quickening. He wrote of an investment he'd made 30 years ago, a small plot of land he'd bought with a bonus from work. Over the decades, he'd used his own savings and savvy trades to acquire the adjacent parcels, one by one. It was his project, his private obsession. The final document in the stack was the deed. 2,000-acre farm. I read the words again, certain my grief-addled mind was failing me. 1,000 acres. It was a number so vast, so absurd I couldn't comprehend it. It was the kind of land that birthed dynasties, and my husband had hidden it like a boy hiding a pack of cigarettes. "Mr. Thompson," I whispered, my voice hoarse. "Did you know about this?" I was his legal counsel, so yes. "It's a significant property, Sarah. Very valuable." Richard was a shrewd man. I looked out the window at my manicured suburban lawn, at the neighbor's picket fence. My world had been this house, this street. And all along, unbeknownst to me, I was a land baroness. I felt a wave of dizziness. David, my son, was getting married in 3 days. His whole life he believed we were comfortable but strictly middle class. How could I possibly drop this bomb on him now? It would overshadow everything. It would change everything. Overwhelmed and unsteady, I made a decision. The secret had been kept for 30 years. Could wait a little longer. The wedding was lovely, if a bit ostentatious for my taste. Amanda, my new daughter-in-law, had insisted on a country club venue with towering floral arrangements that cost more than my first car. She glided through the reception in her designer gown, a vision of practiced perfection. David followed her like a puppy, his face alight with a kind of dazed adoration I hadn't seen on him since he was 5 years old and got the bicycle he wanted for Christmas. "Sarah, you look stunning," Amanda cooed, embracing me. Her hug was light, airy, with no real warmth behind it. I'm so glad we could finally give you something to celebrate after such a difficult time. Her sympathy felt like a performance. Throughout the night I watched her. I saw how her eyes, sharp and intelligent, scanned the jewelry on my friends, cataloging value. During a quiet moment when she cornered me by the gift table, her questions were laced with a subtle poison. "It must be so tough managing that big house all by yourself," she said, her voice dripping with counterfeit concern. "And the expenses? Well, I just worry about you. Did Richard have a good life insurance policy?" "We were always fine, Amanda," I said, my tone cooler than I intended. "Of course," she chirped, her smile never faltering. "David is just such a worrier. He feels so responsible for you now." Later, I saw her whispering in David's ear. He glanced over at me, his expression shifting from bliss to a strange, calculated concern. "He was a good boy, my son, but he had his father's pragmatism without his father's depth. And in Amanda's ambitious hands, that pragmatism was being forged into something I didn't recognize. The happy couple didn't go on a honeymoon. We're saving for a house," David explained over the phone the day after the wedding. "Putting our capital toward a real investment." The calls became a daily ritual. First, they were simple check-ins. By day 3, the tone had changed. "Mom, I was just looking at your property taxes online," David said, his voice casual but too casual. "They're pretty steep. We were thinking maybe it's time to consider downsizing." I could hear Amanda's faint whisper in the background. "Long-term financial viability." "I'm fine, David. Your father and I planned for these things." "I know, but planning from 10 years ago isn't the same as planning for today," he countered, parroting a line that sounded suspiciously like a daytime financial guru. "Amanda was saying the market is hot right now. You could get a great price for the house and put it into a high-yield annuity." It felt less like a conversation and more like a sales pitch. They talked about my limited income, the burden of upkeep, the freedom I would have in a smaller, more manageable condo. Each call chipped away at me, not with overt aggression, but with the cloying, condescending language of concern. They were treating me like a problem to be solved, an asset to be managed. On the 5th day after the wedding, David called again. This time his voice was different. It wasn't worried. It was electric with excitement, the way it got when he thought he'd devised a brilliant, foolproof plan. "Mom, great news," he announced. "Amanda and I want to take you out tonight. To celebrate, you know. The wedding, new beginnings, all that." "Oh, David, that's sweet, but you don't have to." "Nope, I insist. We're going to the Sterling Grill. 8 o'clock. My treat." I was taken aback. The Sterling Grill was the fanciest steakhouse in the city, a place for major anniversaries and corporate deal-making. It was completely out of character and certainly out of their budget. A knot of pure, cold dread began to form in the pit of my stomach. "And hey," he added, his voice dropping into a confidential tone, "a friend of ours is going to join us. He's a financial advisor, super smart guy. I thought you could just chat with him, no pressure at all. He can offer some great advice, give you some real peace of mind for the future." Peace of mind. The phrase landed like a stone. It was the same hollow jargon they'd been using all week. The dread in my stomach tightened into a knot of ice. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that this dinner wasn't a celebration. It was an ambush. "Okay, David," I said, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. "I'll be there." I wore a simple black dress and my late husband's watch, its familiar weight a small comfort on my wrist. Walking into the Sterling Grill felt like stepping onto a stage. The air was thick with the scent of seared meat and money. Dark wood panels lined the walls, and the clinking of heavy silverware on porcelain plates provided a hushed, expensive soundtrack. David and Amanda were already seated in a plush, semicircular leather booth. They were dressed to the nines, looking like a power couple from a magazine, their smiles wide and luminous under the dim lighting. They looked like predators who had successfully cornered their prey. "Mom, you made it," David said, standing to give me an awkward hug. "You look wonderful, Sarah," Amanda chimed in, her eyes doing a quick, dismissive scan of my simple dress. We exchanged pleasantries and ordered drinks. The small talk was excruciating, a thin veneer over the tense anticipation that filled the space between us. 10 minutes later, a man in a crisp, tailored suit approached our table. He was in his 50s, with polished shoes, manicured nails, and a sleek leather briefcase. "Mom," David said, his smile widening with pride. "This is our friend, Mr. Peterson." The man extended a smooth, dry hand to me. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Sarah," he said, his voice as polished as his shoes. He placed his briefcase on the seat beside him, its brass latches gleaming. "And please call me Robert. I'm a notary public." He didn't say he was a financial advisor. He said notary public. The distinction hung in the air, sharp and deadly. The purpose of the expensive dinner, the fake smiles, and the briefcase on the booth seat became brutally, terrifyingly clear. My son's smile was painfully earnest as the waiter cleared our appetizer plates. "Mom," he began, leaning forward as if sharing a grand secret. "Amanda and I have been doing a lot of thinking about your future. We want you to be happy, safe, and unburdened." Amanda placed a hand on his arm, a gesture of wifely support. From her designer handbag, she produced a glossy, trifold brochure and slid it across the polished table. The cover showed a smiling, silver-haired couple playing tennis. The name was written in an elegant, flowing script: Golden Meadows Senior Living. "It's a continuing care community," Amanda explained, her voice smooth as silk. "There are group activities, a beautiful dining hall, on-site medical staff. Everything you could possibly need. You wouldn't have to worry about a thing." David picked up the thread, his words coming faster now. "We ran the numbers. If we sell the house now, while the market's high, the proceeds would more than cover the entrance fee. We can invest the rest for you, manage it, make sure you have a generous monthly stipend for, extras." The word "we" hung in the air. We can sell the house. We can invest the money. We can manage it. My role, it seemed, was simply to cease to exist as a competent adult. "It's just a lot of paperwork," David said with a dismissive wave of his hand. "Legal stuff, bank stuff. That's why we thought, to make it all seamless, you could just sign over power of attorney to me. Plus, it's just a formality to make things easier." He nodded toward the silent partner at our table. "And Robert is here to make it all official tonight. We can get it all done, signed and notarized. No stress, no fuss." Mr. Peterson offered a thin, professional smile and placed his briefcase on the table, clicking open the latches. The trap wasn't just set. The door was swinging shut. I let the silence stretch, picking up my water glass and taking a slow, deliberate sip. I looked at their expectant faces. David, beaming with pride at his own filial devotion. Amanda, her eyes gleaming with a predatory light. They had rehearsed this. Every word, every gesture was part of a script designed to lead me meekly into their gilded cage. I placed the glass down gently. "That's a very comprehensive plan," I said, my voice quiet but clear in the restaurant's hushed atmosphere. I paused, letting them savor what they thought was their victory. "But I don't think it will be necessary." David's proud smile didn't drop so much as it froze, cracking at the edges. "What? Mom, this is a great opportunity." I ignored him. I turned my full attention to the notary, whose hands were hovering over the papers in his open briefcase. "Actually, Mr. Peterson," I said, my voice gaining a new strength, "it's a good thing you're here. I have some documents of my own I could use some advice on." Before anyone could react, I reached into my simple black purse, past my wallet and my reading glasses, and retrieved a single, folded document. It was the copy of the deed Mr. Thompson had given me. The paper was crisp, official. I unfolded it and laid it flat in the center of the table, next to the breadbasket. The words at the top were stark and undeniable. "Deed of Trust, 2,000 acres, Oak Creek County." David stared at the paper. His mouth opened slightly. The brilliant, proud smile he had worn all evening crumbled into a mask of slack-jawed disbelief. The first sound to break the stunned silence was a sharp gasp from Amanda. "What is this?" David finally managed to ask, his voice a choked whisper. He poked a finger at the document as if it might bite him. "It's a farm," I said simply. "Richard owned it. Now I do." Amanda's meticulously crafted mask of sweetness shattered. "A farm," she hissed, her voice low and venomous. 2,000 acres. That's impossible. You let us think you had nothing." "I didn't let you think anything," I countered, my own voice remaining level. "You assumed. You saw a grieving widow and an old house. And you assumed I was a problem to be managed." David's shock curdled into red-faced anger. "You lied to us. You sat there, listening to us worry about you. And you were sitting on a fortune." "This isn't about a fortune, David. This is about your father's legacy. And now I understand why he kept it a secret. He saw this. He saw what you would become." The accusation hit him like a physical blow. He flinched, speechless. Amanda, however, was not. "How dare you?" she spat. "We were trying to help you." "No," I said, gathering my purse. "You were trying to help yourselves." I stood up, my legs feeling surprisingly steady. I looked at the half-eaten steaks, the expensive bottle of wine, the useless power of attorney documents. I pulled a $100 bill from my wallet and placed it on the table. "This should cover my meal," I said. Then I turned and walked out of the restaurant, leaving them sitting in the wreckage of their own failed coup. I didn't look back. My phone buzzed before I had even unlocked my front door. It was a text from David. "You can't just walk out. Call me now." I ignored it. I walked inside, locked the door, and leaned against it, my heart hammering against my ribs. The siege began that night. A flood of texts, each more frantic than the last. Then came the voicemails. The first few were pleading. "Mom, please call me. There's been a huge misunderstanding." By midnight, the tone had shifted to guilt. "I can't believe you'd do this to your own son. After everything we've done for you. Amanda is devastated." By morning it was pure, unadulterated rage. "You have no idea what you're doing." David's voice, tight with fury, crackled from my phone's speaker. "You can't manage something like that. You're going to lose everything." Later that afternoon, a car screeched to a halt in my driveway. I looked through the peephole to see David and Amanda marching up my walkway. I didn't move. David banged on the door, the sound echoing through the quiet house. "Mom, I know you're in there. Open the door. We need to talk sense into you." I stood there, frozen, until they finally gave up and stormed back to their car. That evening I called a 24-hour locksmith. The next day I had a video doorbell installed. I blocked their numbers. I was building a fortress, brick by brick. A week passed in a state of tense silence. The lack of angry calls and pounding on my door was almost more unnerving than the harassment itself. I knew they were regrouping, plotting their next move. I felt terribly alone, out of my depth. The farm, this immense, secret inheritance, felt less like a gift and more like a target on my back. I couldn't do this alone. I went to Richard's old desk, a piece of furniture I hadn't been able to touch since he died. I opened the top drawer. It smelled of him, old paper, cedar, and a faint hint of the pipe tobacco he'd given up years ago. Inside, tucked into an old address book, was a business card. Henderson and Sons, attorneys at law. It was Mr. Thompson's firm, but this was a different name, the senior partner. Richard's friend. My hands trembled as I dialed the number. Calm, professional secretary answered. "Yes," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "I'd like to make an appointment with Mr. Henderson. My name is Sarah Miller. I'm Richard Miller's widow." There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. "Of course, Mrs. Miller," the secretary said, her voice softening with warmth. "Mr. Henderson will be very glad to hear from you. How is tomorrow morning?" Hanging up the phone, I felt the first glimmer of hope I'd felt in weeks. I was no longer just a target. I was a client. I was done reacting. It was time to build my defense. Mr. Henderson's office was a sanctuary of worn leather and old books. It smelled of wood polish and wisdom, unlike the slick city lawyers with glass-walled conference rooms. He sat behind a large oak desk, a photo of him and Richard holding up a massive fish on the wall behind him. He looked at me over his spectacles with kind, intelligent eyes. "Sarah, it's good to see you, though I wish the circumstances were better," he said, his voice a calming baritone. I explained everything: the dinner, the notary, the deed, the harassment. I told him about the farm, this immense secret my husband had kept. He listened without interruption, his hands steepled under his chin. "I'm not surprised," he said when I finished. Richard was no fool. He loved David, but he wasn't blind. He saw the boy had a taste for the easy life, and he worried about the kind of woman he would attract. He sighed, looking at the photo on the wall. He wanted his life's work, that farm, to be in the hands of someone with character. Someone who understood its value beyond the dollar sign. "He trusted you, Sarah." Explicitly. He assured me the will was ironclad. Then he moved from friend to lawyer. "First, we send them a formal cease and desist letter. They are not to contact you, come to your property, or speak to third parties about your financial affairs. Second, document everything. Save every text, every voicemail. Keep a log. Third, do not engage. Let me be your shield." For the first time in weeks, I felt the weight on my shoulders lighten. I wasn't just a grieving widow anymore. I had counsel. I had a defender. A few days later, I knew I had to see it. I drove for an hour out of the city, watching as the suburbs gave way to strip malls, and then finally to open country. Following Richard's hand-drawn map, I turned onto a gravel road marked only by a simple wooden sign that read Oak Creek. The road wound through rolling hills, the fences seeming to stretch on forever. I pulled up to a gate next to a simple, sturdy farmhouse. A man in his late 60s with a sun-weathered face and clear blue eyes came out onto the porch. He wore jeans and a faded work shirt, and he moved with the steady economy of a man who has worked the land his entire life. "Ma'am," he said, giving a respectful nod. "I'm Frank. I was expecting you." He was the farm manager Richard had written about in his letter. He showed me everything. We drove for hours in his dusty pickup truck, over land so vast it felt like its own country. He showed me the herds of healthy cattle, the deep green fields of alfalfa, the stream that cut through the valley. It was beautiful, peaceful, and powerful. "Your husband loved this place," Frank said, stopping the truck on a ridge that overlooked the entire property. "He used to say it was the only place where the world made sense." Looking out at the endless green and gold, I knew exactly what he meant. This wasn't an asset to be liquidated for a condo down payment. This was a kingdom. It was Richard's legacy, and it was mine to protect. My resolve, which had been forged in a fancy restaurant, was now tempered into steel by the earth itself. The cease and desist letter from Mr. Henderson put a stop to the direct harassment, but it only forced David and Amanda to change tactics. They went underground, launching a campaign to discredit me. The first shot came via a phone call from my cousin Carol. "Sarah dear, I'm so worried," she began, her voice a cocktail of pity and glee. "David called me. He said you're not yourself since Richard passed. That you're making rash decisions. He said some country lawyer has gotten his hooks into you and is trying to take advantage of you." I politely but firmly told Carol that I was perfectly fine and that my legal affairs were my own. But the calls kept coming, from old neighbors, from members of my former book club. Each one had heard a similar story. I was paranoid, I was delusional, I was being manipulated. David and Amanda were painting themselves as the concerned children, desperately trying to save their poor, confused mother from herself. The final, unimaginable betrayal came on a Tuesday morning. A polite, professionally dressed woman from Adult Protective Services was at my door. "Mrs. Miller," she said kindly, "we've received a report expressing concern for your welfare. May I come in?" They had reported their own mother. I felt the blood drain from my face. This was their new weapon, to have me declared legally incompetent. I invited the social worker in. With a calm I didn't know I possessed, I laid out the entire story, starting with the dinner and ending with a smear campaign. I showed her the log of harassing calls. I played her the video from my doorbell camera of David pounding on the door. His face twisted in rage. The social worker was professional, but I could see the understanding in her eyes. She saw my clean, organized home. She saw a lucid, intelligent woman who was being systematically bullied by her greedy son. The case was closed by the end of the day, marked as unfounded and likely malicious. But the attempt had an unintended consequence. Frank, the farm manager, has a sister who works in the county clerk's office. Word travels fast in small towns. The news that Richard Miller's son had tried to have his mother declared incompetent to get his hands on her money spread through Oak Creek County like a wildfire. My phone started ringing again, but this time the calls were different. It was the owner of the feed store offering his support. It was the local vet, telling me what a good man Richard had been. It was other farmers, men and women who had known and respected my husband, all disgusted by what David was doing. Frank became my fierce protector, and the rural community, Richard's community, became my silent, watchful army. Having failed at intimidation, manipulation, and public humiliation, David and Amanda took their last, desperate step. I was in my garden, my hands in the soil, when a strange car pulled up. A nervous-looking young man in an ill-fitting suit approached me. "Sarah Miller?" he asked. "Yes." He handed me a thick envelope and walked away without another word. I knew what it was before I opened it. The dense, legalistic language was cold and brutal. I was being sued. They were formally contesting the will. The pages were filled with outrageous lies and legal jargon designed to intimidate. Undue influence, lack of testamentary capacity, fraudulent inducement. They claimed I had coerced my dying husband, isolating him from his loving son and tricking him into signing over his assets. I walked inside, the papers shaking in my hand. I sat at my kitchen table and called Mr. Henderson. "He's filed it," I said, my voice flat. "He's officially suing me." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "All right, Sarah," Mr. Henderson said. His voice calm but hard as granite. "The battle lines have been drawn. Now we fight back." The legal process of discovery was aptly named. It was a time for unearthing secrets. David and Amanda's lawyer flooded Mr. Henderson's office with invasive requests for my medical histories, my private journals, and decades of financial records, searching for any hint of weakness or incompetence. We complied with everything, providing a mountain of paper that showed nothing more than a well-ordered life. Our requests were more focused. Mr. Henderson subpoenaed 2 years of their financial lives: bank statements, credit card bills, car payments, and loan applications. When the boxes of documents arrived, he and I spent an afternoon piecing together the truth. It was a mosaic of desperation. They had taken out a high-interest personal loan to pay for their lavish wedding. Their credit card statements showed thousands of dollars spent at luxury boutiques and restaurants we would have considered a once-a-year treat. Most damning of all was a defaulted business loan for $50,000, for an online boutique Amanda had started that folded in 6 months. They weren't just greedy. They were drowning. The 2,000-acre farm wasn't their ticket to a richer life. It was their only lifeline out of a sea of debt. "This isn't a lawsuit, Sarah," Mr. Henderson said grimly, looking at a credit card bill with a staggering balance. "It's a heist." Their lawyer must have warned them how badly the financials looked, because Amanda decided on one last, desperate gambit. She appeared on my doorstep one evening, violating the cease and desist order. She wasn't angry this time. She was weeping. "Sarah, I am so sorry," she cried, her shoulders heaving with manufactured sobs. "We let things get out of hand. I've been so stressed, I haven't been thinking clearly." I stood impassively behind my locked screen door. "I came to ask you to drop all this," she pleaded, placing a hand on her stomach. We can't go on like this. It's not fair to the baby. Her eyes searched my face, looking for the flicker of sentimentality she was counting on. I'm pregnant, Sarah. Please, let's stop this fight. For your grandchild. For a fleeting second my heart wavered. But then my eyes caught the faint scent of wine on her breath and the pack of cigarettes peeking out of her purse. Had been a mother. I knew the sacrifices a woman makes for her child. Amanda wasn't making any. She was just playing her last card. You have 5 seconds to get off my property, Amanda, I said, my voice as cold as ice, before I call the police and report you for trespassing and violating a legal order. The tears stopped instantly. The mask dropped, revealing the familiar, ugly glare of raw hatred. She spun around and stormed off. Mr. Henderson was a thorough man. The defaulted $50,000 loan to Amanda's failed business had a cosigner. He did some digging and found her. A woman named Chloe who had once been Amanda's best friend. He called her. Chloe, it turned out, was furious and eager to talk. She had been left with the entire debt after Amanda drained the business account and vanished. She had the emails, the texts, the proof of a calculated deception. Amanda had lied about profits, forged invoices, and manipulated her friend into financial ruin. Mr. Henderson flew Chloe into town and took a sworn affidavit. He now had documented, irrefutable proof that my daughter-in-law was a habitual fraudster and manipulator. It was the silver bullet we needed. Amanda hadn't just tried to swindle me. It was her pattern. We all met in a sterile conference room at a neutral law firm. There was no judge or jury, just a long table, a court reporter, and the suffocating tension. David and Amanda sat beside their lawyer, looking pale and tense. Their lawyer went first, weakly presenting his case, making vague claims about my erratic behavior and isolation. Mr. Henderson listened patiently. Then it was his turn. He didn't raise his voice. He calmly laid out the exhibits on the table, one by one. First, the financials, a clear, damning portrait of their motive. Second, the log of harassing calls and the video of David hammering on my door, evidence of their malice. Third, the sworn, notarized affidavit from Chloe, detailing Amanda's history of fraud, the destruction of her credibility. Amanda went white as a sheet. Then Mr. Henderson picked up one last document. This is a letter from Richard, he said, his voice softening. Entrusted to me to be read in the event his will was ever contested by his son. He began to read. Richard's words filled the silent room. He wrote of his deep, unwavering love for his son, but also of his profound disappointment. He wrote about David's obsession with appearances, his weakness for easy money, and his susceptibility to the influence of others. The farm is more than land, son, Mr. Henderson read. It is a responsibility. It requires a custodian, not a liquidator. It requires character, patience, and a love for the work itself. Forgive me, but your mother has those qualities in spades. My greatest fear is that you have yet to learn them. David finally broke. He buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking with silent, racking sobs. It wasn't the evidence that defeated him. It was the quiet, undeniable truth in his own father's words. The lawsuit was dropped the next day. Faced with certain defeat and a potential countersuit for malicious prosecution, David and Amanda surrendered completely. They were left to face the consequences of their actions, their mountain of debt now a tombstone for their marriage. I heard through my cousin Carol that Amanda left him a few months later. I, however, was reborn. The fight had burned away the fog of grief and uncertainty, leaving behind a woman I barely recognized. She was strong. She was capable. She was the woman Richard had always believed her to be. I didn't sell the farm. I moved into the sturdy farmhouse and let Frank teach me the rhythms of the land. The quiet I once feared was now a peaceful, welcome companion. The work was hard but honest, and every sunset over my rolling hills felt like a blessing. Last spring, I worked with Mr. Henderson to finalize the details. A significant portion of the farm's annual profits now goes to the Richard Miller Memorial Scholarship, a fund for students pursuing agriculture at the local community college. It's a legacy of growth, of giving back to the community that had shielded me. Tonight, I'm sitting on the front porch, a cool breeze rustling the leaves of the giant oak tree Richard planted as a young man. I look out over the vast expanse of my land, my home. The battle is over, the harvest is in, and my new life has just begun. I'm at peace. And so, I found my peace, not in the land, but in the strength I never knew I had. But as I sit here now, with the legal battles over, I'm left with one last question that I can't answer alone. What do I do about my son? Is what he did unforgivable, or should a mother's love have room for a second chance? Tell me in the comments, should I cut him out of my life for good, or should I leave the door open? I honestly don't know what to do next.